by the way, fascinating topic sort of that we end up. And by the way, for those of you who wonder, a lot of our topics come from the amount of coaching and interactions we have with other leaders, inside Next Jump, outside Next Jump, world news, everything just kind of, our inboxes and the amount of information flow through our brains and our system is like massive and very diverse. And so I was just thinking, like, there were a couple of things we're thinking about. Obviously, the news for the last 2 weeks, heavy with Afghanistan. Then, of course, at least in the US, heavy with hurricanes, right? There was Hurricane Henri, then there's Hurricane Ida. And then there's a new storm I heard coming, like Larry or something, but like, and then there's climate change stuff, topics, but there's interesting stuff there. It's kind of relevant to some of the discussion we're about to have. But the other theme that we've heard from a lot of leaders from different places, this notion of Groundhog's Day. Do you feel like it's Groundhog's Day?
Or Groundhog's Week?
Groundhog's months, maybe, or quarters.
Or year.
Right? The notion that every week you're going through the same experience. But it's bizarre sometimes how we don't recognize the pattern where, you know, like human beings inherently are more optimistic and hopeful than we like to ever admit. So we start the week thinking, okay, this week will be better. But we found that a lot of people are going through like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, like just trying to get to an okay state. And by end of the week, Thursday, Friday, you're like, okay, I'm in a mentally better state. I can go do something. But then you're so exhausted, you do nothing. And next week repeats with spending Monday, Tuesday, going through all the emotions and all the stuff to get to the right mental state to be able to go take risk, do something bold, but we end up not doing something. And so we're going to backwards work of how to coach this group to better attack this, where this notion of, you know, the developmental GPS, we talk about 1, 2 is literally the same as sense making. It's what we call in the military OOing. OOing stands for 2 O's, right? Observe and orient. Like we're spending most of the week OOing, but when you don't do the other part of the OODA loop, which is deciding and acting, you're not making any change. And if you don't actually decide and act on something bold and big, which is what we call risk taking, don't be surprised that the next week you're going through the same process. So every week we're in a Groundhog's Day, a Groundhog's Week of OOing. We're OOing all week long. And then we start the next week, right? OOing all week long. And until you take bold action, which is taking risk, right? Nothing good will happen. Now there's a dual side of risk. Things go wrong when you take risk. So oftentimes it's scary to take risks because you could be worse off than you were, right? I invited trouble for myself for taking risk. So I'm better off not having spent that energy. So the whole notion of how to take risks, knowing when you're taking risk, which by the way, can seem very similar to being reckless. Risk taking is when it's done right. Reckless is when it's done wrong. Both being bold, right? Both making big decisions, both things resulting in change the following week. One just could make it better and the other one could make it much worse.
I like how Hamish is saying polishing the cannonball instead of firing it.
We're polishing all week long.
Aim,
right?
Aim,
Yes.
aim,
and
never fire.
So a lot of interesting topics there. And so we're going to work on this a little bit backwards. The topic today we're going to talk about actually is around identity, which I think is a fascinating one. And we chose that topic partly because of even what's happening in Afghanistan. When we think about identity, it's fascinating how the two topics that people say that make individuals crazy to talk about is usually religion and politics. And I don't know if you have all experienced friends or even lost friendships or lost family members just because of that topic, right? Which side of the equation you sit on. And so there was a great blog post, which I'll share with you on this topic. But even Afghanistan identity, you think about religion, I was talking to Megan about this. If you look in the movies and all that stuff, holy wars, right? You know, in the name of religion, literally killing more people, doing more harm than you can imagine. Muslims and Christians and, you know, crusades and everything. And Afghanistan has a lot to do with that, obviously going back. So there's a lot of stuff there that we want to cover, but we're going to kind of break this down into two parts. Let me kind of share my PowerPoint here. Give me a second. All right, let me do this. So we don't have a lot of slides, but we're going to go through this topic and would love to get you guys engaged and talk about this. But we're going to talk about this topic of, let me see if I can get the bottom out. If I do, massive
This is
success.
going to be a good day if that's the case. What do you, oh,
Yes, sorry. I have no idea why
Brexit
it works.
called about 40 friends. What does that mean, Simon?
What was it?
Brexit called about 40 friends for me. What does that mean?
The whole London Brexit thing,
Yeah, I know London
politics, right?
Brexit.
So
Oh, you
probably lost 40
friends.
friends.
Sorry, cold.
right?
I didn't know
Yes,
that.
so,
Okay. Some of the words and
Yeah, the British words, you
What?
guys have like, you know,
yeah, apparently we have words that you don't understand either, but
like what?
I don't know. I can't think of one right now, but I feel that there are.
But
Are there? Somebody think of one.
so what's interesting is this, even in a lot of the coaching we do of how habits are so important, we talked about habits as the foundation.
Mhm.
We talk about the most important habits are habits that help you attack the hard stuff, right? So the question that came up is, what is the hard stuff, right? Now, on one hand, you can argue it's different for all of us, but there are commonalities. We are all organic material, not computers. The human brain, I think we shared in one of the earlier lib classes, is not a computer, because recognize a computer operates the same way, depending on time of day, depending on weather and everything. There's no bad mood days for computers, but the brain and the human beings operate massively differently based on all types of environmental factors. And so to understand and decode how to optimize your use of the brain versus when it's not. So there's all kinds of stuff there that's important. But within that hard stuff, two of the hardest things, one is identity and the other one is intentionality. We're going to cover intentionality next week. Identity is what we're going to talk about today, right? So within this topic, I just want to share really quick. Newbies and even old people, like not old being like, not age old, but like, veterans of lip.
Veterans of lip.
Which by the way, we had a joke between,
Oh God.
I think Josh had said, I don't like
Josh,
the
I
name
remember
lip.
like last year, you're like, I don't really like the title, like
Lip.
lip, because leadership and practice short
Right.
lip. And I was like, yeah, I can see how it's.
And then Laura last night was like, we're gonna make lip clips, right? I was like, little clips of.
I was like, I
We're
don't
like
know
the
about
first time,
that.
right? It took a while for her to get why we thought it sounded wrong. This happens to be lip 69. So like,
I was like,
just,
let's not talk about this.
we're all grown-ups here,
It's
right?
leadership and practice, but the alliteration,
Yeah,
we
but-
thought it was kind of good.
And we
but I
kind of
like
did
the
it.
idea
but-
of little clips of
yes, of lip.
leadership and practice classes.
Yes, lip clips of lip. But either way, sorry, totally inappropriate, right? Or didn't mean to
See?
be. If you're
We
thinking
got home
inappropriate.
really late. Sorry, this is just.
But just so you know, we thought it was kind of funny. Of course, I strong arm forced the name in, despite, but we don't mean it inappropriately, of course. But
Yes. Mhm.
anyways, we talk with our lips.
Simon said, "Don't Google lip clips."
Yeah, I know.
69.
Yeah,
Yes,
no, that's
don't.
not good.
Okay,
Don't do that.
this
Don't
is
do
not good.
Um,
This is not.
All right, so just really quick, what's interesting is we get a lot of notes from people who have benefited from some of the topics and discussions, even the people you met here. It's been pretty cool seeing collaborations of different groups occurring even through this kind of forum of people who have met. And Brent just yesterday sent us a note, like he's going to do a little class using a lot of the lessons and things he's learned, and actually like get paid for it too, I think, for the Navy, for some real senior people for command, which is really cool. And he asked us, are you okay with this? And like we had a chance to read it really quick in the middle of the hurricane, and the response was really simple, which is kind of what I wrote at the very top. Anything to further the movement. So what is the movement? We talked about redefining. First, we said the future of work, but the future is here now.
It's here now.
And we're talking last night about how, in 100 years, a lot has changed, but work for the most part has not changed. And for those of you who remember us presenting about even the right chairs at work, and it's crazy
It's
that
appeared to change, right? But it hasn't really materially changed. And what matters?
but the office chair
But the
going
office
50
chair.
years back is the
Yeah.
exact same, which is insane, right?
Mhm.
Like as in,
Mhm.
it's crazy to think how components they say if you take a current office and just remove anything with a screen,
Yeah.
it looks exactly the same as 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's a little insane.
Yeah.
And so it's due for that change. And so it's no longer the future. The future is here, redefining work. And our kids were asking us the question, right?
Right.
Oh,
Oh yeah, sorry. I was just sorry. When I was looking at this, Melanie, it's very cool. She's presenting at UNC Greensboro later this month and using many of the principles she's learned through our course, right? And this is the whole idea of what you were saying, furthering the movement. But yeah, so Matthew's iPad kind of wasn't working in the car the other day. So
Matthew's your son.
we had 45 minutes to chat, right? Because God forbid, like you just put that down and chat with me. So we had a good 45-minute chat, and he was asking me about, aren't we all here to make the planet better, to make the world a better place? I'm like, wow, he's only 11. He's really, school is really kind of, it's impressive, right? I wish when we were little, we were taught that it was not that. But he said, that's what Next Jump is here to do, right, Mom? That's what you guys are doing at Next Jump. And I said, yeah, Matthew. And he was kind of like, but like, exactly how, right? So of course I'm like, am I being tested right now? But I said, we're trying to change the world by changing work. We want to make work a better place. We want to make work a place where people want to go. And I explained to them this whole better me, better you, which he knows, but I think sometimes re-explaining, I said, we're all here on this planet to grow ourselves for the purpose of helping someone else. Right. And that's the whole idea of servicing other human beings. We're all here to help service other human beings, but you have to grow yourself. So we're here to better me, as in take care of ourselves, grow ourselves so we can help others, which is the better you. That will make us a better planet, right? That's the better us. That will make the world a better place. But just simply to make work better. And so then we were talking about how we've always talked about
It's
how
been a
work
journey
is
we've been on.
the vehicle to change the world. If
Yes.
work changes, that's the for-profit organizations with so much money. If work changes and upgrades to this flywheel of better me, better you, better us, you could fix the world's problems.
It's this idea that, people are much more powerful, organized in tribes or teams.
Yeah.
It's been from day one, in caveman days versus going solo.
Right.
You see this in sports all the time. Even Mackey will share this in basketball. A well-functioning 5-person team will beat out any team with a solo star. Teams are more powerful, and it's become more important now than ever before. And yet that work change and catch up of it.
Yeah.
To me, I think what's happened with work from home in this whole COVID situation is everyone's talked about kind of their job titles, independent contributors, asynchronous, and this notion of what goes missing when we go that solo. And there's a lot more than people are realizing. The whole discussion of office, home, hybrid, it's not about commuting. It's not about, there is a lot more missing, and I think it's going to come out faster. But what we were talking about was this whole notion of, why business is so important as a vehicle for change and making the world better, right?
Yeah.
I mean, everyone on one hand wants to find purpose to kind of make a difference on the planet before you leave planet Earth. When we put our business hats on, where is the most firepower in the world organized as teams? Where is the most smartest people, capital, technology, firepower to go make that change? And it was very clear. Nothing in the world will change materially enough until business makes it their mission. Because every nonprofit with their, hat in hand begging for funds, and they're doing great work, and many are doing amazing things, not enough until the business world says it's going to be my mission. And so that is a huge part of what we're doing. And the slogan, better me plus better you equals better us, the biggest areas of misunderstanding is this. People do not start the phrase with better me. They start with better you. It's like, this is good for you and it will help me. It's like quid pro quo, right? That whole like tit for tat, as opposed to, it's the oxygen mask theory. You have to get stronger sustainably yourself before you can help others. And us is not then you and me, it's the world. And this is one of the biggest misunderstandings on this slogan that we put together years ago. Just give me a second.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Rahima, what you're saying too. She was explaining to her 14-year-old about why she's going back to work full time isn't just to afford their lifestyle, but to contribute in a way, right, where you're making the work environment better is a huge contribution to the whole, right? Because we all spend the majority of our time at work.
Yeah.
Majority of your waking hours are at work.
And so for us as a company, we've been on this 27-year mission. It's 27 years since I started Next Jump.
Yeah.
Is it 22 since you've joined, or 23?
23.
23 years since Megan's been here. Obviously started as an
2021.
intern, moving up the head of revenue to co-CEO.
Yes.
But you can tell our age now,
Very
right?
proud, very proud
But
of 1998.
from the very beginning, if those of you who don't know, DDO stands for Deliberately Developmental Organization. Harvard University, out of their education school, did a 3-year study looking for what is the future of work. And they basically came to this conclusion that the future of work is the company or the organizations who build the best adult learning centers. That learning does not stop at school. In fact, that's only the first quarter of your actual learning, starting at 3 to like when you graduate college or grad school. The other 3 quarters of your life, most of the learning occurs at work. So whoever is able to grow an individual faster and better than anyone is going to have the greatest competitive advantage. And those companies are what they call DDOs. They ended up in their study rejecting the usual suspects you'd expect. You'd expect like a McKinsey who invests heavily to train their consultants because they charge for it, or Google's and whatnot. They rejected them after spending time with their senior teams. And they said their two companies are the best in the world. One of the largest hedge funds in the world, Bridgewater, and NextJump was actually included. And so this comes from sort of, for us, years of kind of work in just iterating and figuring this out. And that's always been the crux of our betterment. I think there's a lot of other things we do. We invest a lot in health and all kinds of other things, but the highest above else was, how do you help someone learn faster and better than any other place? But what's interesting about Better You is this. We do a very big part of giving. Giving is, to be honest, for 27 years, we have not spent $1 on marketing. Never bought an ad, never bought, I mean, which is insane for a company who does, deals with consumers and whatnot. We've never spent money on marketing in 27 years. But instead, we took all those funds, and our investment in marketing was giving. It was helping and giving. And the way that Better Me, Better You works is kind of, you fill your cup and then you spill over, right? It's kind of that old biblical thing. Fill my cup and then I spill it over, and back and forth, right? And I love this CEO years ago who said, the whole idea of giving back, if you're giving back, you've taken too much. I love give as you go. I've always believed in that. We did that from the very beginning, give as you go, right? So every time our cup spilled over, we would give more, then we'd upgrade the cup, spill over, give more. And it was always that oscillation. And my mom, who's actually a pastor of a church, had always told me, like, a simple rule, and she said it in Korean, so it translates a little weird, but basically you give what you're good at, not what you suck at. So whatever you get good at is what you give. Well, we got ranked best in the world at developing people. It became the number one thing we gave away. The very reason we have COA, reason we have LIP, teaching these classes free every week, it's all part of this movement, and all part of our biggest gift, which is education, right? Knowledge of how to basically grow brain power people. So we give away everything we've learned, including a lot of relationships and whatnot. And then this whole idea I mentioned in the business, right? This notion that if us is not just, hey, it's us, NextJump, and then who we give to. It's literally going bigger, saying, let's us represents the world, and recognizing that making the change in the world, the cavalry needs to come from the business world. No amount of nonprofits can do enough. The business world needs to make it part of their job and mission, responsibility. But what's been interesting is this is a slide that we had created before, this hub of innovation. If you ever heard this phrase, the more you give, the more you get, it is a true phrase. Sometimes it takes a long time. It can take decades, sometimes 27 years. The more we gave out, if you think of NextJump in the middle and pointing arrows out, over time, more came back in. It created a hub. And around a decade ago, we spent time, and I was on the board for Mayor Bloomberg, interviewing the then president of Stanford University. And Stanford University is credited as the center and the spark and the hub for what created Silicon Valley, the global hub of innovation for tech, Stanford University. Very few people would argue against that. Our goal since 10 years ago, and we spent time listening to how they did it, and we have this like 300-page document of all their details, because I was on that board and all their studies, but it's kind of NextJump's goal was to be the hub of innovation, but for people, not for tech, but for people, and leveraging all the assets we have in different parts here. So a couple of things. I know in many ways, like a lot of us travel trips and whatnot, a lot of you are looking forward to even this big event we were having, opening office. Flagship is the main office we opened, and delays, COVID, Delta and whatnot, but there was a couple interesting things that we came to. We're going to start to, be cautious. We're very COVID conscious, vaccines important, all that stuff, but we're going to start to hold what we call mini events. And we're testing some internally first next week, and then we're going to roll up mini events. Think of even like your favorite instructors and coming here in person and having a class. Or like if you were interested in hearing, two of the best talks I think in COA I heard was this guy Tank, who's the number 2 at the Space Force. Awesome guy to come speak, right? Josh knows him, worked for him before. Or like Glenn Gaffney, who was the deputy director of the CIA. It's like insane to hear and to come in and have them. And so it's an example of like coming in small groups, mingling network. So stay tuned for that stuff coming very soon. We're experimenting rapidly and coming up, fitness, brain teasers and everything all coming through. But the other part I want to recognize is this notion of anything for the movement. one of the things that's kind of important to us, and so maybe just stop sharing for a sec. Laura, if you can spotlight Mackie for a second. So when we talk about the movement, we always want to put more firepower recognizing models, role models. Want to recognize Mackie in the better me, better you vein to getting to better us. Mackie is one who to us is just want to spend time recognizing him being such an awesome example of this. And not a next jumper side, but from outside next, what we call external, non-next jumper. So as of this week, we're talking to Mackie. We built this tier in our company, a new tier called partner. Partner is what typically people know in law firms and Goldman Sachs and whatnot. It's the highest tier. Partners in those firms are determined looking backwards in length of service, amount of revenue you brought. We chose partner looking forwards. The people who actually have the most potential, the highest demonstration of learning, coachability, but following this better me, better you notion. And so we made a decision this week to make Mackie the first external partner in Nextron. So as of Tuesday, he's getting full access to this new office, use the space as his second home, right? Or home office. This place is built like you would not believe. And all the perks that come with partners. And it's something that we're just giving you the beginnings of modeling what we want to do a lot more of. But please join me in congratulating Mackie for all he's done. And Mackie, just keep doing more of that.
Yeah.
Right. Be more of an example, share what's working, what's not working, all this
it's
stuff.
like be like Mike back in the day, that's showing our age.
Be like Mackie.
Be like Mackie.
I like it.
It's like be like Mike, be like Mackie.
Be like Mackie.
Just be like Mackie.
Mackie, if you want to say anything, it's totally up to you. But
BMM, BLM. Oh, it's BLM, but in a different way. Be like Mackie.
Don't use the acronym.
Don't use the acronym. Okay. WWMD. What would Mackie do?
Oh, what would Mackie do?
And he looks so like clean cut today. He must not be teaching
Actually,
basketball.
he didn't
Mackie, you can unmute now if you want. Sorry.
He's on vacation. That's why.
Sorry. Yeah, I am on vacation, so I try to bring the beach. I always say my two favorite company catchphrases are Nike, just do it, and Corona, bring your own beach or make your own beach, whatever. Sometimes you got to throw on the Hawaiian shirt, and no matter where you are, bring the beach to you. So anyways, thank you so much, guys. I'm always honored to be included in amazing stuff like this. So the office is amazing. Can't wait to get in there. And I've been at summer camp. I've been running summer camp from, showing up at 7:30 in the morning, leaving at 6. So I've been MIA from LIP and from my coaching, my developing toughness in children class, but I look forward to getting back to that starting. I was going to talk to Megan Charlie today about it, but not this coming a week from today, but 2 weeks from today, I want to get back into COA and start doing some more classes. So, I got a lot of, I'm getting a lot of credit here. I got to make sure I keep up the good work and don't let stuff die down. So I look forward to getting back into the community full strength now that my camp responsibilities are done. So thank you guys. Always an honor and glad to be back. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome,
we're excited, Mackie. And I think, we think about like someone who exemplifies, we've been talking about this better me, better you. What does that mean to get on that flywheel? And the consistency of it matters, right?
Yes.
Intensity is one thing, but consistency really matters a lot.
Right?
And so like Mackie, like you were the only person we can think through that like outside of just the next jumper,
I would say at the highest level.
At the highest
level. So we wanted to start
That's
there.
what we're saying. There's other people without question. We're
Without
just saying
question.
at the highest level, where do we want to start, right? And,
Yes.
and Mackie, you were
And
just,
what's fascinating? We do a workout class before this with Janine,
yeah,
and then we spend a lot of time usually coaching and mentoring her.
yeah,
And we're talking about this whole Groundhog Day and notion. And what's fascinating, one of the topics we want to teach maybe next week or the week after is around collaboration and what it means, right? Collaboration is coming together and partnering with someone, some company. My wife works in fashion, and when brands get tired, fashion brands, they usually do a collab or a collaboration. Gucci might collab with Apple and create a special thing for iPhone cases and whatnot. It's amazing how that sparks energy. And there was a separate study that we're looking at where it was talking about how the notion of collaborating, the notion of being with other human beings, not over Zoom, but actually like,
together,
when you're partnered,
physically together,
right?
Yeah.
I know we think about the fun side of it, right? It's so much more social. I miss going out, restaurants, movies, or less movies, but like social clubbing, whatever it is, right? Social like collaboration, social, similar.
Yeah.
But there's two other sides of collaboration you want to think about. This one study said that there's data that shows that people get smarter when they collaborate. when they are with other people, versus when they work solo, they don't get smarter. So that's interesting. But the other interesting part that we haven't heard as much about is around the notion of energy. You know how we feel depleted right now, being solo in Zoom calls and, like asynchronous and whatnot. But the power of good collaborations actually increases your energy. And we were saying, like, if you remember the lip class a few weeks ago, where just Boston came to visit.
Yeah.
The partners in Boston came to visit, and that alone just lifted our energy. I mean, crazy enough for me to suggest doing a random dance at the end of the class, which is so
Very
like my terror zone.
Mhm.
Like, it just like, it's amazing how energy shows up when you collaborate, by the way, with the right people. Wrong people can suck the energy out of you. You can get the opposite. It can be worse.
Right.
There are energy vampires, but find the right collaborations. And we're saying what the right collaboration always is an element of I need them and they need me. When you find these partnerships, these collaborations where I need them and they need me, it's some good stuff. Hold on to those, keep nurturing and watering those. And so that, for us with Mackie and the partner, that's kind of our next step of putting more firepower. Right? The benefit of kind of our better me, better you over the years was we built a lot of power, whether it's physical space, relationships, people we know. And so we're putting our firepower furthermore behind Mackie and kind of like this whole, like I need them and, they need me sort of like, and that's what Adam Grant would have called a give and take over time. There's a lot of cool stuff there. So we'll talk more about that in the future, but that's all part of that. Okay.
Awesome.
So coming back to this real quick, but what's interesting, obviously, talking about Mackie, is I wanted to, with Afghanistan, for those of you who were part of the group earlier, we created this new program called Social Capitalist, SC. And the first one was Mackie, where we are giving Mackie $100,000 per year to give away to any nonprofit of his choice. And in fact, it doesn't have to be registered nonprofits, help anyone, right? It's for the rest of his life. 100,000 every year. If he does a really good job, we'll up it to $1 million a year, and we'll up it to 10 million a year if he keeps doing a good job. And the point is this: we've identified the best way to sometimes help other people is to find those who are in the arena and empower them. And Mackie was one of them. It's the first one we chose. But one of the groups that he chose to fund was a group called Peace Players. And this is such a fascinating group. Peace Players is built, right? And so this is kind of on their website. Like, they have this bold vision to go solve what every country, every politician, everybody in the world has been unable to do, which is create world peace. And they're saying, we're going to make world peace happen through basketball. And so they get Jewish kids and Muslim kids to come together and play basketball. And so why they hate each other is their parents hate each other. But then as they get to know their teammates, they go to mom and dad and said, hey, they're not that bad. The notion, and this is so cool, it's global. They do crazy stuff. And I've heard like sort of like they have like black kids and police family kids playing together. I mean, I love
saying, they're my friends. I play basketball with them.
And they're really cool. And there's nothing wrong with them. And they're just awesome. Amazing. And so what a cool organization. Like, I didn't even know that existed. But it's crazy. And it's so cool to find things like this. So this is one of the places that Mackie funded with his social capitalists and getting involved and whatnot. And we'll find ways to collaborate with them, probably even at a bigger scale. So it's just really cool to see stuff like this, which then goes to this topic of identity. And we were looking, and on Twitter, this woman, I've never met this woman, but just wrote like, what causes ordinarily rational people to lose grasp on rationality? When Simon Sparks said he lost 40 whatever friends from Brexit, like literally, like you're like, some of these relationships you build over years. Right. Like WTF, right? How the hell does that happen over something like this? And so there was a whole thing. Paul Graham is someone that, he founded Y Combinator, which is the biggest and best well-known incubator of startup companies. So DoorDash and Uber and a whole bunch of the biggest, Airbnb, came out of Y Combinator. And he was the founder of it, but he writes his blog post, which I'll show you the clips of it. And he responded with a blog post, actually from 2009, he wrote, called Around Identity. And so I'll show you what's in there, but this woman said interesting points. It's amazing how identity, when you identify yourself with something, whether it's religion, whether it's race, whether it's, a country, or whether it's, politics, like you get very emotional, right? And it feels like an attack on the political point is an attack on you. And this person was saying it's hard to stay rational when you're under attack on the stuff. You go into defense mode. So the blog post, feel free to go search it yourself. You can find it. Just Paul Graham. But I want to highlight some key parts of it in the post. He said the more labels you have for yourself, the dumber they make you. Then he says, if people can't think clearly about anything that has become part of their identity, then all other things being equal, the best plan is to let as few things into your identity as possible. His point was make our identity footprint as small as possible is the best, because the larger it is, the more closed-minded we'll be. He said, more generally, two people cannot have a fruitful discussion about a topic, especially if it engages the identities of any of the participants.
I mean, it's basically talking about how do you become more objective, right?
Yes.
Like, how do you become more objective in any conversation is a really hard thing to do when it's wrapped up into your identity. You know, we were talking, are you going to share like the few examples we were talking about? Sorry, I don't know your, that I think a lot of us can identify with our career and what we identify with being a successful, you know, entrepreneur, a successful leader. Like I'm, you know, I'm the
Successful
husband and I have to
airman
be
or
like,
CEO.
I'm dad, but I have to be the successful, like whatever it might be. Moms, I think is a huge one, right? We identify with being a mother. So when that's not going well, it's like wrapped up. I face that. I feel that. I can completely lose objectivity when talking about my kids when they're struggling, because I'm just so wrapped into being a great mom. And when things aren't going well, it's like, I can't even hear. I don't have objectivity.
Well, and the fascinating thing that we're talking about is this. I think for me, my identity oftentimes gets defined by being CEO of NextJump. I founded the company in 1994. So when NextJump does well, I feel I'm doing well. When NextJump does badly, I feel I suck.
Yeah.
Right. What's wrong with me? And then like for Megan, it was been the flip.
Yeah.
Right. In the sense of the mom.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what I was just saying.
Right?
Yeah.
But then what was interesting, what Megan was saying was Megan's a co-CEO, but being
I have more objectivity, I think, in the business working with Charlie, because it's not wrapped into my identity. In many ways, it feels like the upside. Like, you know, I identify with being a mother. The upside for me was being successful in my career. That was like the upside, I guess. I can't think of another way to, so my identity isn't wrapped up into being a co-CEO. I'm wrapped up into, I want to be a great, I years ago had worked with Jim Lear, one of the best performance coaches. And I talked about, what do I want to say on my tombstone? I wanted it to say, she was a great mother, a great, you know, a leader, a great wife. So it's like leader is one of them. It's not, I don't identify with just, I must be a great leader. I have to be successful in my career. It's one of the pieces, but it's, you know, it's not the thing.
But it was fascinating for us how it was opposite.
Yeah,
for me, what was secondary was being a great dad.
Yeah.
Right. And remember, there is only one primary, and it can be just a percentage point higher or 2%, but there's like a difference. Meaning, like, I get a lot of compliments. Oh my God, I can't believe he's a CEO, but he's also a great dad. Right. And it's like, it's kind of like, and we're talking about
a number of times people will say about my husband, what a great dad he is at the school, this and that. And I'm like, I show up at the school and I don't get that. What a great mom she is coming to the school and doing whatever, but dad gets it. And I'm like, what? Why is dad getting, not that, you know, but see, I got issues with that. I'm like, well, I'm working full time. I'm helping the school. Like, but dad shows up at the school and just grabs the kids. And it's like, wow, what an amazing dad he is.
So Greg, if you don't mind us being a little bit vulnerable for you, but like we're saying, Greg is one of our partners in Boston. He's in the screen, but we're saying it's interesting watching Greg, objective, always seeing somebody else. Greg, I believe,
has a lot of objectivity raising his kids. Sometimes I'm listening to it and I'm like, wow,
phenomenal
even if you have challenges,
coaching.
I'm like, wow, how'd you say that? How'd you come up with that? I can't believe you could do that under that kind of stress, right? But at work, he's wrapped up in identity and being successful in his career. So he's less objective at work. So it's completely the opposite, just like with Charlie. So it's been a fascinating, you know, like you have one primary. You can there's only one thing that's going to rack you, you know, and what comes from your past or right.
So it's going deeper into this topic. If you remember this diagram from before and all the research and whatnot, the way our mind works and operates, thinking about the past, by the way, is 50%. That small pie in the middle that's not colored is 10%, which is the present. 40% is not the future, because the future is unknown. It's our future outlook, how we see our future. And the thing I circled here is saying, you know what's changed in the game for work and for everyone? The game has changed where it's now 90% mental.
Mhm.
The past, right? Remember, like, you ever see that movie? Is it Sliding Doors with Gwyneth Paltrow?
Oh,
Like,
serendipity.
or I think it's
Oh,
Sliding
oh,
Doors.
sliding doors. Yeah, you're
Like,
right,
or,
you're
or
right,
there's a
right,
bunch of
right, right.
movies where, like, you know, everyone sees the past differently, right? It's amazing how you can see there's a couple of movies where, like, you see the past from different viewpoints, vantage points, and they're all different. I think there's a movie called Vantage Point, like, and meaning the past is in our head. The future outlook is also in our heads. And those two affect each other the most. The least thing that's impactful is the present. Where you live right now, where your career is right now, how much money you make, how happy you are right now is much less important than you think in the scheme of things than this 90% pie of your memory of the past. And we learn the way you remember it and the way you keep feeding that memory actually alters your memory. That was one of the most, like, oh my God, wait, I can alter my memory of the past. It was like a holy
Yeah,
shit.
you
Can't
can
believe that's
narrate
true.
it different.
The future outlook, and everyone talks about rewrite the narrative for the future. And you know, we've all been trained to write that bullshit narrative, right? That bullshit narrative of, like, it's going to work out. And then remember the whole thing that was
Oh,
Stephen
that's
Cutler,
the
the whole,
bullshit meter. We all have the built-in bullshit meter. So you lie to yourself, it's not going to work.
it doesn't
Good-
work.
good-
It does the opposite. It
Good
backfires,
luck. Yeah,
right?
that's
But this idea that, you know, why mental health is such a big case and issue and challenge is that 90% of the battle for all of us now is in our heads. There's this great podcast we're listening to too, like
Yeah.
Esther Perel she's like one of the top marital, like, counselors, but she's done cool stuff in startups and everything too now. But she was saying how marriage counseling in the past used to be about challenges with family. But now in the last, whatever, decade plus,
yeah.
people come in less about family, but about what do I want?
Right.
My purpose, my happiness,
Yeah.
my life. Before it was like, because of our marriage, our family, our kids are suffering, but now it's graduated up, and it's a sign of kind of progression.
In the
right?
world, right?
Like-
I feel like 50 years ago, my parents weren't worried about how happy they are in their marriage. It was like, are we getting by? Do we have enough money? Are Aaron and Megan doing okay? Like,
Right.
where are we gonna
Survival.
surviving?
Maslow's
It wasn't
hierarchy
like,
of needs.
I need to make sure that I'm with my soulmate forever. It's like, there's no soulmate discussion 50 years ago.
But also, you know what they say, if you look at cities and how, like, even neighborhoods develop, you know, a sign of good things to come usually is by watching art. Like, when galleries show up, when there's enough, you can actually start to invest in art. You can start to invest even in political discussions
Mhm.
versus, like, you know what, I'm just trying to pay rent and survive and have food on the table, right? There is a hierarchy of needs. And as you graduate up,
Yeah.
you know, the biggest 100-year change is that the number one driver of success or the number one driver of failure everywhere is people. And so that is something that was not the case 100 years ago. It was land 100 years before that, you know, land and natural resources. And then it moved to machinery, and it is now people. But as that's happened, as we've elevated up the hierarchy,
Mhm, mhm.
90% of the issue is in our heads. 90% of it. And we talk about this where we talk about narratives,
Mhm.
right? When it's in our heads, what is real and what is narrated? And the notion of narrated is fascinating. So I'll talk about this notion of how future outlook is most closely related to decision making, and the past is most closely related to teaming.
Can I just read this for a
Very
second?
good.
Because there's a few different things in here. I wanted to kind of just take a second. So Josh, you were mentioning he took a class that said our eyes take in 6% of the information and our brain applies the other 94. Josh, do you mean, if you unmute, do you mean like you're storing it and then like using it unconsciously? It's part of now your mental model, or what do you mean by that? Talk to me.
Yeah, so the class I took by this neurosurgeon, he was just saying that, you know, as you're looking out, you take in about 6% of the information in front of you. Your brain's context puts in the other 94%. So like if you like think of sitting in a meeting, right? Like, and there 6% of the information coming out you hear and you see. Your
Yeah.
brain applies the context of the other 94%. So that's why, you know, we talk about mental models. That's why
Yeah.
what's your brain going into a meeting and you think about that, man, that's nuts when you talk
Right.
about reality. So
Right. That's how distorted it can get, right?
Yes,
On your own
depending
side.
on how your brain is, right? Depending on where you're at.
And, you know, I know we played that
Hmm.
podcast before, where I think the biggest almost misnomer is to compare the brain to a computer.
Yeah.
Because the idea that computers have like hard drives, we store information, and how we have celebrated the smarter brain that can regurgitate more information. you see Jeopardy, you see people who are good at like, those whatever, Trivia Pursuit type
Oh,
games,
yeah.
regurgitate like history with dates and specificity, right? The notion that more information that you can regurgitate is not an indication of intelligence. There's a whole podcast we wanted to play here, but
Yeah.
it was all around how intelligence is what you do with that information.
Like,
That's where
like now it's saying information is such a commodity. If you don't discover something new with the information you're getting from different places, if you're not pushing your brain, go mentally lazy and not discovering a new insight, you're not intelligent. So it's saying just because you have memorized information and use fancy words, it's not intelligence at all.
So I love
right?
this thing. For instance, how to
Yeah.
get smarter, right? Learn new words, right? So you have word of the day. People practice expanding their vocabulary. The point was this: that makes you appear intelligent,
Mhm.
but the appearance of intelligence is not the same as intelligence. There's a lot of things we do now
Mhm.
that is coming from 100-year industrial age to look intelligent, to appear intelligent. Grammar, vocabulary, remembering facts, like whatnot. And regurgitation does not equate to intelligence.
Yeah,
Yep.
can I switch gears for a
Sure.
second? Because Hamish, you were saying, because we were talking about identity before, we should get back, but it's good to hold on tight onto values, he's saying, if you keep them distinct from identity. The idea, what the difference between values and identity,
It's very
right? Because
similar.
like it's very similar.
It's very similar. We'll
Like-
talk about it's
like,
very similar.
I'll give you a quick for instance, but see, it's like, it's subtle where I have a value system that's very heavy in work ethic, pure hard work, effort, like as in blue collar, get on your hands and knees, scrub the floor effort. I was a maid, like I grew up blue collar. Like I have a very visceral, like you work hard, pure effort. To the point where it's so stupid now, where if I'm going to be a little bit later than Charlie because the kids are getting dropped off at different times, I don't like him doing any of that administrative effort, like we do the apples and we eat breakfast together. I don't want him doing that without me because I see that I have a value system that says, I don't want you as my teammate doing anything for me that I can do I don't, it's like this weird, it's like, why not?
The notion of rigidity.
I'm so
comes
rigid. I'm like,
from-
I don't want you doing that. He's, what are you talking about? You don't want me doing that. It's easy for me. I want your brain power, not this. It's easy. I'm like, yeah, but I have an issue with that, right? Like, but it
So
comes
we
from
had a
my
whole
past.
discussion. We're still
Let's
unpacking
see,
this.
I'm unpacking this one, but it's not, my identity isn't wrapped up necessarily into just hard work ethic, but you know what I mean?
But there's
It's
something
part
there-
of my
but-
value
but it's something
system
there
that I
where-
don't like when people are lazy.
I'm like cutting apple slices, and I'm not even kidding, multiple times. Megan has like checked me out with a knife in
I
hand
got
so
it.
that she can take over. I'm like, I don't. That's so dumb. That's like, why are you
He's like,
doing
what
that?
are you doing?
And then
And you are.
not quite right. Not quite right. And this is the part. What about that?
What about
What's
that?
happening? Because
What?
how unimportant that is in the scheme of things, but why you're weighting it so high.
Right, why
You
waiting
know,
so high?
That notion of mental models and whatnot, like 90%. What
Yeah.
the hell is going on in that brain? When we talk to preschool teachers and especially, teaching of younger kids,
Yeah,
the number one thing they wish they can do is unscrew the heads of the kids and find out what the hell is going on in that brain. And when we think about this notion of narratives, which is where, once again, identity comes in, values come in, everything
Yeah.
going backwards in the past.
right.
The problem is this: we are all in balance. We overbeat self up or we underbeat self up. We distort stuff all the time. Even this whole thing about, we're talking last night about Megan feeling like, like she feels inferior as a mom, right? And I was like, and she keeps mentioning this one example of this
Yeah.
one individual who made a comment. And I was like, Megan, do you know how many times you told me that example of that woman?
And I said like
But I
maybe
was like,
5 times. He said 24 times.
In my
at
view,
least.
it's at least 12 to 24. And
I
so we had an
don't know.
argument about that number besides the point. But my point was this, like, do you know how many people I've stood by listening to them talk about how amazed and what a great mom you are and how hard you're attacking challenges in kids and family proactively.
But you wait.
And I was like, but
weight
you
the
don't
other one.
recite
Yeah,
those stories.
Yeah.
You're overweighting this one. Why?
Yeah.
Like this notion of like, and then society has it. I think
Mhm.
generally speaking, right? Great. I'm judging you as a mother before I judge you as a leader at work. But then for dads, I'm judging you as a leader before I judge you as a dad. They're all connected,
Yeah.
but it's like, and yes, society
Yeah.
has part of the issue, but society is made up of all of us as individuals.
Yeah.
What's most in our control is what we are doing to ourselves.
Yeah, that's why Josh
know?
is saying that's where the brain applies 94% of the context, right? Like
And-
I'm
and the-
taking in information and 94% of it's getting distorted with how I
And
see
the
it.
past, and you know what we learned from some PhDs who study brain power a lot was this: the more you remember the past a certain way, in this case, the mother story negatively,
Yeah,
it distorts the past and it becomes a bigger beast.
yes,
Like the distortion of the past, instead of one person, it can feel like 10,
right.
then like 50, right? And so
Right,
there's a
right.
notion of
Yes.
understanding, and this is a whole part of,
Yes.
oftentimes the problem with biases and blind spots is we don't even know how we're doing a disservice to ourselves.
Yeah,
We are narrating things that make us do worse. We're
Well,
narrating
yes,
things that make
yes.
us more crippled, more paralyzed. And instead of risk taking, we get into reckless decision making. And that then puts us backwards. And there's all kinds of things there that we
yeah,
will go into over time.
yeah. Heather, you were asking, just we can get back to it, but even later, but do you really value that woman's opinion of you? And this is where, there's certain people, right? Like she shouldn't get my time like that, right? She has an extra, she was like the head of this part of the school and a mom. I just like, yes. So like, I shouldn't though, right? It's like, but it's like,
Yeah,
you
but
do.
shouldn't and
I know. That's what I'm
this is the
saying.
part. In theory,
And in
in
theory, no.
in outward appearance,
Yes.
of course not.
Right, right.
But in practice, when you're alone in your head, right? The 90% that no one gets to see but you,
Mm-hmm.
right? When something hits at you at the core, there's that the comedian, Dane
Yeah.
Cook,
Yeah.
he talks about that whole like
So,
the best insult from a wife to a husband is you're stupid like your father. And
yeah.
the husband's like, and then like 15 minutes later, he's like, my father's a smart man.
Yeah.
Like there's a part of
Right,
like, when
right.
something cuts
Just
at what
cuts.
matters to you the most,
Right.
right? It doesn't take a lot, but we're not recognizing how much of that we're doing ourselves. So we're coming back to probably two of the most important skills, decision-making and teaming. Decision-making is synonymous with risk-taking, and we'll go into how intentionality is synonymous with risk-taking. We'll go into that next week. But this week, we want to talk about teaming and how when you're working with someone is where fear shows up most, right? And even like in the problem of social media, so I'm working alone. Well, you're reading social media. You're reading about
Yes.
everybody else. So the fear of how I look, right? Appearances actually has exploded with the digital footprint we all have,
Mhm.
right? They said Instagram, Facebook is actually a footprint of the life I aspire to have because I just show you the clips of the best of,
Mhm.
right? But Google, if you look at what you search, is the reality of the life I have, which is horrible and terrifying, the kind of search terms that fall at the top. But the notion is everyone's seeing the life that I aspire to have, but they think it's real. They think that's what 95, 100% of people's lives are. So what ends up happening, and the connection between the two is this: once you start taking risk is when stuff will go wrong, right? Conflict and things show up once you try to go and take risk. And now remember what we said about Groundhog Day. Don't take risk. You're going to stay in this endless purgatory of nothing changing week
Mhm.
after week. You're going to be oohing all week long, just trying to figure out sense make to then repeat it the following week. So, but the minute you start to take risk, you will have issues. And issues is where now you can best solve with teams. But as you do that, then teaming is synonymous with appearances and how you look. We call that lying, hiding, faking. But that then, right? So I'm going to connect these two here. Remember the previous 2 weeks, we showed sort of the training protocol we're putting together of how to build good decision-making teams. It is not a solo sport anymore. It's a team sport. So what's connective on the right, which we shared, which is the foundation is habits. Then you actually in practice have to go to risk-taking, which then creates fear.
Mhm.
As opposed to in theory, you kind of build it up. Well, teach me how to deal with fear and then I'll take risk. So we're teaching it backwards, mainly because of the news in Afghanistan, all this stuff with that identity. But if you go on the left, right, once again, decision-making comes and risk-taking comes from future outlook. And a simple way to look at it is, if I didn't think it'll work out, I wouldn't take the risk, right? And then we talked about the negative plan and the positive plan. I mean, when you say like, this is 100% I know will not work, but we don't try it then. It's when we think actually it might work out is when we try it, which is why it's future outlook. Risk-taking and looking forward is actually very synonymous. But teaming, fear, and the word identity goes backwards. Think about it this way. You meet someone new. You don't think much about them. The minute an hour goes by, the minute time goes by, you start to judge them, label them. Identity comes from the past. values comes from past experiences. And so the challenge with teaming and fear and moving to then identity, all being synonymous, is this: how many of us have become unknowingly prisoners of our past experience? Or said differently, narratives, right? Imbalanced narratives of our past experiences. You know, the idea that values come from our past. And they typically say, when you look at it, the theory has been, it's like until like 18 or adulthood, it's like your values are set. I'm like, that's bullshit in my view, because there's new experiences coming in. And however those experiences and narratives are being refueled in the way we narrate or over narrate, it starts to change who we are. But without recognizing if we're hurting ourselves or helping ourselves towards good behavior or bad behavior, we end up building rigidity. We end up building this footprint of identity and then equating it to things in the past. And suddenly you have these eggshells around you, the inability to be objective, the notion that Paul Graham said, you literally become dumber on the topics that you have fixated your identity on. Like, meaning you can't invite critical feedback. One of the podcast talked about a signal of intelligence is the ability to invite skepticism, as in give me critical feedback. Well, guess what? When it comes to identity, it doesn't go so well.
So
Right?
interesting. I didn't see Josh before you. I was just trying to catch up with some of the chat. He was saying in adult development theory, you know, Robert Keegan, the notion of the more you grow, the less identity you hold on to.
Mm.
And then it makes a lot of sense,
That's cool.
right? I mean,
Because the more you grow, you know, it's interesting about the
Yeah.
cup overflowing.
yeah,
You know, people who protect their IP, intellectual property information,
yeah,
when they get overprotective, it's because they have no more. It's like
Right.
it's like whales living on stored fat, right? They don't have
Mm,
to eat for like almost a year or whatever it is, 6 months, whatever it is.
right.
The point is, when you have learning new stuff, you give it away because you're like, oh my God, like I have so much. Like
Mhm.
it's my cup is flowing over. Sure, take this, take that. People who hoard, and I can't tell you this without saying an NDA, this and that, you're not learning more.
Right.
You'll see those who are in the flywheel of learning, they're less fixated on who they were before.
Yeah.
They're fixated on who they're becoming,
Who they're becoming.
right? And they're interested, and you're shedding. It's like when you watch, we went crabbing, we're on Block Island, and you find soft shell crabs because they're shedding their exoskeletons,
Is that what that
right?
is?
So they become soft. Like the point is, you're constantly growing, even if you have a hard shell like a crab,
Mm,
right? When you
shed.
grow, you shed that. And and it's painful. It's soft and vulnerable and squishy in the window, but like the
Ooh.
notion of constant growth, right?
Hmm.
Makes you hold on to less of who you were before, right? Like when we interview
Mhm.
new candidates, especially coming out of college, and, you know, we hire some of the brightest coming out of schools like Cornell and MIT, you know, Princeton and whatnot. And they're so fixated and they've been trained through school these days of how they're the world's talent and whatnot. And I tell them, I'm just going to break it to you right now. We really don't care who you are right now. We care who you are going to be tomorrow.
Mhm.
How their tests that are built right now, even in engineering, where it's built to create 90 to 95% failure. And so we can find out who's the absolute best. But even after 1 year at Next Jump, 100% of our engineers pass that test easily. Point being, like literally, you're not so great. We care about how great you're going to become. And I think that's the component that's
Right.
different. Because in the days of the industrial age with factories, right, we were just headcount, right? Replaceable, go shut up, check in, do your job, don't complain. I have an opinion of how this factory should run. Shut the hell up and keep clocking that machine, do the repetitive task, and then go home. And if you work overtime, we'll pay you a little bit more. Like it would literally, the human being, you were just supposed to get something done that was a known quantity of work.
Right.
It's what we call working in the light
Mhm.
versus navigating unknown, ambiguity in the dark. Intelligence is also synonymous with the word creativity, making something that
Something
did
new.
not exist, right? That someone was saying, doing unexpected on a regular basis. That's intelligence. Unexpected on a regular basis. And it's kind of cool. There's different ways to think about it, but this is the change. And yet you can't grow, right? You can't work well with other people if you've wrapped up and have a footprint that's too large on your identity.
Yeah.
And so this,
And I think Lori Jarvis is asking this notion of one's identity tying back to your brain's plasticity. I think what you mean is like, it's almost like this is what's tough. The longer you're on planet Earth and the more you've wrapped yourself into many different identities, right? Like I saw Mike Collette was mentioning, you know, you don't just do CrossFit, you're a CrossFitter, you know, 305, it's like you're fivers, right? I identify with that. I love it. Like I'm part of these little, so the more, but it's like the idea that the more of those you have, you build them longer you're on planet Earth, right? To unwrap some of them, to not be, and it's not saying those aren't bad, being part of these like tribes. Everybody was in the chat was talking about being part of a tribe, and it reduces lizard brain and it makes you feel safe, and it's like great, right?
Yeah.
Like you're a next jumper, you identify with being a next jumper. Like those aren't bad identities. Those are good identities.
We should get Ed Fido to come speak once.
Oh yeah,
this guy's cool. He's done crazy stuff in the UK in changing education, but he shares this story about like 5-year-olds. You know, that you do a self-portrait and it looks like a 5-year-old portrait, which kind of looks a little bit like Picasso when he has like crazy kind of look, but then they get feedback. They get feedback from other 5-year-olds. They get feedback from the teachers, and it's like brutal, honest truth. And they iterate on it. And literally it turns into this amazing painting. And the point is that, you know, when you do something and it looks ugly, you decide art's not for me. I'm not good at that. But if you're able to get that truth, the brutal truth, and then iterate on it, even 5-year-olds produce amazing portraits of themselves, right? And so there's a notion here of the need to iterate, but the need for collaboration, interaction with other human beings to help us see our blind spots, to sharpen and chip away, right? This guy was saying intelligence is hard, but so is building muscle. And you can't say, I did the workout, I'm done. No, it's an ongoing, organic, all the time, consistent process. So the two things I want you to take away is the last slide here was in identity, the two exercises that will come up always is tied to self-awareness, right? Self-awareness is a lifelong journey. You know what the developmental GPS is built to do? It's a self-awareness tool. It's to help you get awareness of what matters most in the 21st century, because everything else follows afterwards, after self-awareness. But once you get awareness, right, then comes the ability to have difficult conversations. Now, people talk about journaling. That's not talking when you're talking by yourself, right? A difficult conversation with at least one other person, but doing it consistently. Now, you'll see the reason why it connects to decision-making, the risk-taking, to this identity discussion is when things go wrong, when you take risk and stakes are high, what will show up, what went wrong between the two of us or our team, it's going to come down to things that we're holding what we call sacred cows. The parts where I said, nope, no-go zones. You kind of take spots. We can't talk about that part about me. We can't talk about this. And those no-go zones are where we are self-creating prisons. We're becoming prisoners to our past experience that we are altering through over-narrating certain pieces. And so the tools of understanding self-awareness where we lack awareness, getting to these difficult conversations, I'm coming back to the right side of the slide real quick on the habits. There are three main things that we baked into this training protocol on habits. One is unconstrained open time. Most of us are way too scheduled. It's almost like these staccatos of meeting to meeting to meeting. You know, when you want to talk about something as hairy and crazy to navigate, right? As identity, self-awareness, difficult conversation with someone, you need an open block of time. The other part is these discussions are so hard, you need oscillations and the ability to hit intervals, right? But then because this stuff is so heavy, a lot of the habits we built is to save decision-making energy. If you're worried about how to be healthy, what to eat, what to do this, what to do that, you know, when do I stay late? When do I go early? All those things take cognitive decision-making energy. How do you save it for what matters most? So we'll go over this more and more over time, but
I like what you were saying, Simon Sparks, a while back. You were like, you know, if 94% of our brain is sort of hijacked, like by our own information we see, 6% is sort of real, and then 94, do we even have free will? You know, do we even have free will? And it's like this idea that you can attack that, right? I was thinking, there's a few questions in here I wanted to get to, but you were just saying these no-go zones. Of course you can attack it, but
Simon, do you want to ask your kind of more depth? See here?
Yeah. I mean, the idea of free will is something that I find really interesting. Anyway, like there's all of these sayings like you're the product of your environment, or like the 5 people you spend the most time around, and what Josh was saying earlier about these studies. And I remember hearing this, and it's like you spend a lot of your day blind. If you just move your head quickly, like your brain just goes, I don't know what that was, and just makes it up. So if your brain is constantly just filling in context and telling you something like that, do you actually have any control over it? Is it just something which is just predetermined and you're just kind of being strung along by like your brain? And have you set it up in the right way, or have you not? Have you filled it full of biases, and are you only ever going to so are you always going to repeat the same mistakes? So do you have any free will? Do you not? You know, it's quite interesting.
So you know what's interesting always is to try to find a comparison point, an analogy to this. And so when we talk about free will, I think we're talking about the mind, right? Less about the body. I think, and the reason why I compare it is this. So there's a professor at Columbia we got to know over the years called Hitendra. And he's the one who shared this insight with us. You know the notion of downward dog. If you ever do yoga, it's a downward dog, right? Most people can do it. But when it comes to your mind, we can't, right? Downward dog your mind right now. You're like, what?
Like on command.
Like
can
meaning,
you downward dog
like
on command?
Physically, I can control myself, but I can't
Mentally
control my
downward
mind.
dog as in come down, right?
Right.
Like when you say like come right now, how do you do that?
And it's fascinating because, you know, I think in one of the brain podcasts we had said extended mind, we talk about, you know, for example, like we're now victims to technology. You know, the notion of the most annoying coworker is the new employee who taps you in the shoulder for everything. And you're like, can you figure some stuff on your own? They're like, can I ask you where the bathroom is again? Can I ask you what your name is again? Can I ask you where the file folder is? Can I ask you like every time, can I ask you when I can go home? Can I ask you like tapping on the shoulder, annoying. You're like, I can't focus because you're tapping me on the shoulder all the time. Well, technology was built to do that in such a subtle way, in a way that fills your dopamine hits and whatnot. You know, on your phones, when those red dots show up, circles, 1 message, 2, 3, 4, 5 notifications. Emails now have the things that pop up that show you got a new email. You can get a slight preview of it, right? Like how many in your phones and bings and dings, and you can turn everything off, you know, but we choose not to. Like it's built to be that annoying new employee who's tapping you on the shoulder.
And you can't willpower your way through this. You actually have to set it up to create that space, right?
But my point is this, is it really out of your choices and options?
Right. It's like,
so what Hitendra talks about is this. We all have constraints in life. Things are difficult. Things suck, and we have constraints of all sorts. I have a boss who's unreasonable. I have a kid who's difficult. I have this is difficult. My income isn't there, whatever it might be. But he says, but come back to this notion of the downward dog physically. Have you thought about what are my options and choices despite the constraints? How many of us sit and say, okay, these are the constraints, I'm going to map it out. And by the way, how many of them are real and how many of them are self-narrated and maybe overly done, right? Now, what are my options and choices within? It's amazing how, you know, like we coach even in our own company, the different teams that need to collaborate. Every team believes they're constrained by the other teams. I can't do this because they have to do it. Every team says the same thing. We're like, do you realize like if you collaborated, like you would have so many more options of what you could do, but everyone claims I have to be in my lane. It's literally like a factory with an assembly line. They're like, I have my part of the assembly line and I can't really go and influence, work with or affect other people's assembly line. So I am left in this straitjacket of a confined box. And I'm like, so who told you can't talk to them? Who told you can't? Like, it's amazing the need to recognize it's a self-created prison, that it's not to say constraints aren't there. I don't want to be one of those, you know, hippie, like, oh, it's good in life. And, you know, let's smoke some weed and everything's happy. And no, it's not that bullshit. It literally is tied to the fact that there are tons of options and choices. And like being intelligent, like muscle building, you have to work at it every week. And as you strengthen that muscle,
you'll get faster and better.
You will start to,
Lindsay's like, how many of us actually have time to do that? Like, who has time to like get into a mentally downward dog?
I love it. I love that question.
Yeah.
Can you afford to not? Can you afford to live as a prisoner that is confining you more and more, leaving you as a prisoner of your past, of your job, of everything? And literally, the thing I hate to tell people, the wake-up call is this. The world is changing and COVID accelerated that. The future of work is no longer, it's just work. It's here. It's changing so fast. Good luck competing, right? You will fall so far behind. And the way I look at it, you can play catch up later. But the problem with something organic, right? You ever watch someone, if you're competing on a race, right? Say you want to run a marathon or whatever it is. If they've been training for 6 months and you start now, sometimes, I always joke around. I started Pilates before Megan. There's reasons why I'm a little more flexible in certain parts. I had a 3-month head start. So every time we have a Pilates instructor, I say it's because I had 3 months of mat training before you. Like, you can't catch up.
And I was a cheerleader for like 10 years and way more flexible, but it doesn't even matter. We did 6 months more Pilates, doesn't matter. Is mental downward dog a quick bout of meditation?
No, see, I don't see it. So, what's interesting is this, the idea of meditation is a technique. I think it's kind of, in my view, oversold as the solution for way too much. There are many, many solutions. And I think this notion of, if you look at a lot of the authors, a lot of the research, it's all solo work. When you think of sports teams, you think of the best sports teams. It's best coaches like Mackey or coaches like Mike Collette. I know that when you train someone for something really important, you instantly try to create like a coaching team, right? Because people train better in teams. Everyone's game elevates physically when you work in teams, but they act like mentally it's better solo. Quiet, alone, by yourself, go for walks, meditate, this and that. And I'm like, I'll tell you right now, I think it's such bullshit. If you get the right people, right? That doesn't mean 100, but in the right small teams, starts at 2. You cannot come close to being able to compete at the speed of getting mentally more fit.
So in the case for Hamish, right? So is it Hamish talks to Brent? Because right now, so many of them are working from home, right? So when you're talking about a team, right? They're like, what the hell are you talking about? Because I'm working from home right now. All I can do is lay down and meditate or whatever. I think in person, the way we're talking about, we're able to talk. And I think there is something with why we believe that work eventually will have to be back, majority of it, to collaborate and truly create things that have never been done before. It's gonna be really hard to do over Zoom, right? That's the notion, because having sometimes difficult conversations at that level is hard to do.
And it's not to say, by the way, there isn't productive work to be done solo.
Yeah.
Once the decision's been made, crank away. But you'll see cranking away is going to be valued less and less. And there'll be a need to figure out how to then adjust that cranking away. Like nothing is that clear anymore.
Yeah.
If anyone says we have a plan, we wrote it, like we spent 3 years studying it, just keep executing it, they're like living under a rock. There's so many things changing. It's like, someone was saying like Delta is a variant. And then, someone's like, there's a variant on ISIS too, called ISIS-K.
Yeah,
there's a variant even in terrorism. It's like, there's variants in everything. We have to adjust to it.
Yeah.
Everything is moving at faster paces.
But so if you're Hamish, I'm just saying, right? So you're Hamish, how would you mentally downward dog? And I think you're saying I think for Australia, we've always talked about, we used to call TPs, our training partner program, the talking partner program,
yes.
Because thinking out loud,
this is a great question.
Thinking out loud and getting out all the shit in your head, the good, the bad, the ugly, the stuff that you don't, which is why you need one person that you trust. And even it's all relative to who you trust, but one person where you feel like you can unload, right? Unload some of the stuff going on, and then they will also do the same. Now that's a hard place to get to, because a trust partner, training partner, talking partner, thinking partner.
Can I correct that a little bit? Don't start with unloading, although you might at times.
Yeah.
Start with taking risks together, because then you will need to unload. Right? When you try to do something really difficult under high pressure, high stress, urgency, time frame, the best way to stress anything is to try to get better results faster. So next week, we'll talk about intentionality, the predicting and sharing your prediction of what we're going to do together. And trust me, when you put that bar high, which we're used to train to manage expectations down, when you set the bar high and having to do it fast, issues will show up and you will see the kinks in your teammate. So here's another analogy of it. If you have a car, a great car you claim, but you keep it parked in the driveway, or you just drive around the parking lot, you'll never know what it can and can't do. Drive it in highways, drive it through rough terrain, you will get a sense of what's wrong. And this is the part, every organic team, right? Human beings, things wrong will show up only when driven under those conditions. Stress, higher bar, higher standards and whatnot. But you know what I was thinking about kind of this notion is, so the answer top of my head, Hamish, is it's basically collaboration, right? The idea of finding a collab partner. And you can find them virtually too, but I think of it this way. A lot of times people mistake collaboration going one time. It's what I call pedestrian short term. That's not going to do anything for you. You know how you meet someone, you're like, we collaborated great one time, like that doesn't count. Everyone's fantastic usually on the first date. Not everyone, but most people are. It's just the third date. You're like, you know what? The same old shit. You're so boring. I can't deal with you, all that stuff. It's like amazing. Even going more than one time, I think about 3 times. If you can collaborate with someone 3 times in a rather short window, right? It might even be over 3 weeks. It might even be over 2 weeks. Not one day though, right? But a little bit longer. The notion of how do I, sort of go there, when you try to collaborate together, it's like partnerships. You have to find partnerships. And when you try to do something together, create something innovative, new, right? That's the risk taking. And we'll talk next week about intentionality, which is not only sharing what you're about to do with more people, not on the internet, but more people, and then inviting criticism, critical feedback to iterate all that stuff. It's amazing where the act of doing that will start to actually create this, not only intelligence, energy, and you'll know when it does the opposite. You know what? They're awful to collaborate with. Guess what? I hope it's almost like we were coaching Janine before, we're saying, when you begin dating, like don't come and plan, like the first person I date, I plan to not only marry, have children with, I already have names picked out, and like I already picked out the clothes I'm going to have you wear. Like, don't do that. There's a part of like, and you don't need to date 12 people at once either, but the notion of it's got to be more than one. And, I would think at least 2, right? Try at least 2, maybe 3, but if you go beyond 3, I think you'll forget their names and forget their, like, the point is somewhere between 2 and 3. Try to practice collaborating.
I mean, so Josh is
not venting, but collaborating.
Josh is mentioning the PRT groups. People are asking, we have more people who want to join PRT groups. It's interesting talking about these small groups, right? Because there are ways to leverage these small trusted groups where a lot of you don't work together in the same organization. So if you screw up, it's not going to have a big impact on your career as you're trying things and trying to get to. So there could be collaborations within those groups.
So maybe one of the things that we could help do, is I know we put you guys together, and in many ways, all is like Hamish, Lados, Allentown, right? Like, and then as you got to know each other, it's some bizarre way through the PRT groups and even some of these discussions. You've got to know the person in a different way without knowing anything what they do. Right. It might be time for you to kind of type up your little mini bios, right? And share it as a group. So you have a sense of, that's what you do for work, Hamish? And that's what you do, Monica? And that's what you do? And like kind of a sense of, when I say great collaboration, right? I define it simply as I need them and they need me. That's where you want to get to the end point. Recognize it will take some bumps to get there. But to do that, you need to get a sense of what they do, what their challenges are, what their, if you had to say, here's my nucleus of, this is what spills over in my
I sense some identity with Group 9, by the way. They're like Group Niners.
I don't know. But what we might do is this. Maybe Laura, we can help do this. We have what we call a 411. And we'll rejigger this 411. We build it when we get coaching and mentoring. But maybe in the 411
set up Group 9 sucks. Well, Hamish, we should. There's a competition, but we could.
There's no need for that. There's no need for that.
He's teasing. He's teasing.
But But what I'm saying is this: in the 411, to list your vitals out, right? It might whatever you want to, where you are, maybe your situation, family, this, that, all the way to what job and career, or whatever it is, and then. To me, the 2 more important parts after the vitals is kind of like where your cup spills over. You know what I mean? Like that notion of being able to say, this is my asset, my cup spilleth over. Because that's the easiest to give sustainably, right? And I know some of you say, I'm totally empty. No, trust me, you have something, right? Then comes the flip side, where I think some areas I could use the most help. There could be some interesting matchmaking. And then, by the way, use your creativity to get creative. And it allows you to collaborate. And we'll get it happening within PRT groups, but it can go beyond, because collaborations between people, even in different organizations, it could better optionality, options open up.
Right.
It's amazing. And I was going to say, once you start to build muscle in this field, I will give you one thing that's going to be the drawback of it, right? You will not be able to sleep. You will not be able to sleep because your mind will no longer be numb. It will be running at 150-mile-hour winds, moving to like 250, because the optionality is endless. Like when you collaborate the right way, instead of going for this one, I had no choice, this one I'm constrained everywhere, it goes into endless variations in so many different ways that literally you cannot shut your brain off. And then we'll go into a whole different challenge. We have Argentina sleep class done on purpose to help. Like there's all kinds of oscillation tools we have in that we can help you with, but you got to have the problem first, right? And not because I'm troubled and I'm depressed, but it's more like I have almost endless choices and I'm struggling with being able to settle down on what to try first. Now you're ready for good coaching.
It's interesting. Mike is asking, how do you assess people that suck at collaborating, right? Because it's like you want to find people you're gonna, but yeah, you do go through bad.
Can I tell you that question? I mean, Mike, you're obviously in a relationship right now with someone, but how do you assess someone before you date? Right?
It's hard.
I know you look at them physically,
Yeah.
you read a little bio of them, maybe they like cats or don't like cats, and you judge them based on vegan or not. But like literally, you got to go on a date, right? And what happens in a date? The same thing, collaboration. You got to try something. Try something bigger, riskier. You will learn a lot. Try something safe. You'll learn literally nothing, right? Ooh, like, so it depends on how urgent you are for this. If you want to get better faster and get results and get out of Groundhog Day, go bigger, right? But go bigger doesn't mean bet the farm either, right? Like we can go bigger on something like, just like, let's try one yoga class together. Probably not going to tell you a lot. They'll tell you something better than nothing. Right. But there's something that you collaborate on.
So funny. Simon is asking, can we get a Tinder for coaches? I've never used Tinder. But that's the dating thing, right? The matching, right? But the whole complementarity. So like we are starting to build like all these analytics around how you would actually find someone who would be a good mental kind of complementary partner.
Yes, true.
Somebody who's more
True.
optimistic versus pessimistic. Somebody who just sees it differently. And then the challenge, you're like, ooh, that's awesome. Somebody's
Actually,
totally. And
Tom
but
and
then
Lokia-
it's going to be about how do you get along with that person, right? Because it's like nothing is free, right? You're not going to find.
Complementarity is another fancy word for diversity, which is another fancy word for you will argue like hell.
Yes.
You will have more
Yes.
difficult conversations and more differences,
Yes.
right? So then the flip side of that benefit, which is where it makes a great team, is that you're not going to get along unless you invest in getting along.
So then we have to find ways to get
Right.
along, like taking dance class, because that's what I want to do. And then like
And get
gardening, which is what he
nonstop
wants to
for
do.
years.
And we have, I don't know, we
Yes.
have composts and bugs and
Not bugs.
worms.
There's
And I don't
bugs.
want to do
There's no
that.
bugs. There's no bugs.
He wants to do
I'm
it.
composting. I'm composting
There
back
is
here,
bugs. There's
right?
worms.
And these worms eat a
You
lot of
brought
stuff.
worms here.
No, but like it's supposed to be good for Earth, right? Person doesn't
Anywho.
care about planet Earth,
I
but-
do care.
Yeah,
It's just,
not the reaction. But yes.
Anyways, sorry, there's so many different things to talk about. I love the idea of the collaboration in the small groups.
Yeah.
Like PRT, somebody's asking for resiliency training. Think of it as a small group where you can just try shit
Yes.
with each other. Yes, worms are great for compost, but we can try shit together in small groups. So we'll figure it. I think we'll
Yes.
map this out a little bit more.
I-
Add more
I'm
meat to it.
I'm telling you, even on this one screen we're looking at, if people here collaborated, even in groups of two, I bet you there are ways to advance what you're doing at work or even at home. Like it could be parenting, parenting children, aging parents. It could be side projects of hobbies. It could be work related. You could advance stuff faster than you even realize. And this is where everyone literally is in there. Oh, well, no one wants to work with me. And everyone's saying the same thing.
Mhm.
Well, the solution is sitting in front of you. I don't know if you guys do this in the chat. Like if you just right mouse click on the chat, you can do a select all and copy it and then just email it to yourself, right? Like you can read and see what everyone said. That's a data point over the weeks of what people have said. And I think even afterwards, Laura and team posted up on the site. So you can see it on the site as well, right?
Mhm.
So there's a trail of it everywhere, right? There's a trail of information everywhere. And I hate to say it, like kind of like to Mike Collette, like you got to go on a date, right? You can only tell so much from looking at them and seeing what they did. Like, and it's amazing when you try something though, right? I don't know if you ever watched the show Bachelor, Bachelorette. I stopped watching it since COVID, but before that I watched every season so far. But like you'll see these crazy relationships where they break through the most is they'll do like bungee jumping together or something. And she's scared of heights and all this stuff. And then they're like fall in love. It's like scary stuff bonds people. Now that Bachelor teaches you that lesson. The other place that teaches that same lesson was the military. The reason why they make boot camp so terrifying is that's how people bond. And people don't fight for country, they fight for each other. So literally, they figured out the science behind that as well. So the idea of taking big risks together, and when you declare and share it, even to a group like a PRT, right? Hey, Mike Collette and I are working on this, and we're going to go and declare something big under a time frame that's fast that others could then inspect. That's stressful, right? Because now, you know, the opposite side of intentionality, of being able to make that declaration, is integrity. When you didn't do what you said you were going to do in the time frame you're going to do, your integrity is at stake,
Yeah.
which is why suddenly it goes into whose fault was it, the blame game. What the F went wrong? And this is where you flip from now the decision making and risk taking to this other side, right, of teaming and what is wrong. And we tend to start usually with what is wrong with the other person. So then realize when you're home at night, what's wrong with me, but I can't talk to anyone about this. You got to go work through this stuff, right? Because if you work through that stuff, those two work hand in hand. So,
Oh my gosh, so cool.
is that cool? Yeah.
Some really awesome people on here to collaborate, Megan. Some really cool business ideas or
There-
cool,
I mean-
I don't know, things in the planet to fix that could come out of these small groups. That'd be,
Better your careers,
That'd
I
be-
mean, like better your family
that'd be so
situation,
cool.
better your hobby interests.
oh, that'd be so
Go,
cool.
go fix something material in the world that matters. I mean, there's like some really cool people that's in this mix. And
I was dying. I don't know if Naomi's here, but because I let her, she had asked something about, she had mentioned like people in a certain age group are like trying to identify with something. It was like such an interesting
wait,
question.
wait,
And I don't know if she's still
wait,
here.
what's her name?
Naomi, and I don't know
Oh.
Naomi. Naomi, if you're
Naomi,
here,
are you here? If you're going to unmute.
if she's here, but then we can go. I'm like, I was curious about this identity. So if not, If not, maybe
Anyone,
next time.
we're about to leave, but
oh,
anyone
and then
have
Brandon,
anything?
which is Brent's student, Brandon had asked a question that now I'm trying to look for if Brandon is still here, but he might be gone. All right, sorry. We didn't. Oh, Brandon is here.
Yeah,
Brandon,
Brandon,
do you want to
unmute.
unmute? Go ahead. Do you want
Yeah, sure. My question was in reference to when Charlie, you were talking about the analogy was crabs shedding their exoskeleton, and during that period of where you are a bit softer, maybe a little more vulnerable, but it's also your opportunity to grow. I guess in general, what's your strategy? What usually happens during those periods? I've experienced them, obviously, like everyone here, but like, what's your take on that? You and Megan, both of you guys.
when you feel like that,
Yeah.
what do you do? Because I'm soft and I'm like a soft shell crab a lot. You're not.
No, you know what? We're all soft shell crabs. It's just that some of us appear to have a stronger skeleton
Yes, yes,
and
yes.
others seem to have no skeleton, when the reality is we're both soft shell crabs with
Yes.
mushy skeleton. It's all the same. But anyways,
Mhm.
there are two things that come to my mind. One was something we learned working with the best in sports, Olympic athletes, world number ones in sports. And you know how in sports people level up, right? You level up in skills, whether it's golf or whether it's boxing, whatever it is. And the insight they shared was this: when you level up, right, from level 1 to level 2 to level 3, you always do worse before you do better. And just the recognition that worst is the precursor to getting better makes you not give up in that window. So once again, it's mentally,
Yeah.
if that helps you a little bit. Remember, a lot of these things mentally kind of will fail you, but like
Yeah.
just knowing that was kind of, oh, that was helpful. Like, so sometimes like we'll talk and be like, hey,
Yeah,
we're doing
well-
really bad. Maybe we're about to get into the next level,
But
right?
yeah.
This notion that the growth always goes like this. It's never straight.
But I was going to say, Brandon, and we talked about this yesterday, even for our teams, you know, when you feel like I've got to go help other people, but I don't feel right myself, which is you feel mushy and kind of like soft shell crab. There's always somebody who's worse off. And you think you can't help someone else or teach someone else something or go out, reach out and just, but the act of doing that can get you back on fire. It can make you start to feel like, okay, I'm not as like scared or I'm not as weak. Like you start to build it back up. The idea of helping someone else, it's very counterintuitive when you feel like that, right?
Mhm.
But when you realize you feel scared, you don't feel right yourself, you feel kind of exposed or raw, then you go and try and help someone and it just gets you back into this like action preceding the
That's a good
motivation,
one.
right?
That's a
The
good one.
action, like just getting into action can kind of help you get on the better flywheel versus like, I think people think, well, I don't feel right now. And so I feel like I can't do it, you know? I can't help others. I can't coach other people. I can't teach anything. I don't feel good myself. I got to get myself right before I do that. Getting yourself right
This is
is
a good
like
one.
getting out. You have to like get out there. So like, there's always somebody worse off, somebody more junior than you, somebody more, I don't know, who just
Literally,
started Brent's class. Like I don't know, like it just,
the extreme of
Yeah.
Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yes,
You know
yes,
how they
yes,
cure
yes.
alcoholism for those people? Step 12, the last step is to help someone who's sicker than you, the newest
Mhm.
entrant. There's always someone worse off. And it does something weird, not only feeling, when you
Yeah.
do that, it refines the foundation of stuff you know and
Mhm.
what you don't know.
Yeah.
It shows the gaps. But it feels good when someone needs you.
yes.
And they say that's why you stay off alcohol, because the newest entrant is counting on me to make sure they don't drink. And that very thing backwards then peels into making me not drink.
Yeah.
And the flip side of it, looking at a different view, is this: when you see how bad someone is, you feel pretty good, right? When you're in that state, you feel pretty down. You're like, God, they really suck at coding or presenting or whatnot. You're like, I'm pretty good relative to that. Or you can't.
Yes.
You ever
can't
hear
help
someone?
yourself.
You can't help
No, I
yourself. Like,
know.
no. Stop doing that. Like, it's
Yeah.
amazing what that can do to boost back your
Yes.
ability to feel confidence.
Yes.
So it's like a dual effort of helping someone, but feeling good about yourself and boosting your energy back up.
Mhm, mhm.
But I don't know if you can see this. What I was drawing was this: growth looks like that, versus what most of us do is we repeat the same thing over and over again. When all the studies of careers, people are in this crazy purgatory cycle of repeating careers every 18 to 24 months. Some now it's going shorter, 6 to 12 months. Like, you get to a place where you suck and you're not happy with it, you move to another job and you repeat the same thing.
Yeah.
You hit the same plateau and then you repeat. You're literally repeating the same job, not developing at all, for like in 1 to 2 year cycles, 10, 20 times.
Yeah.
Because simply the fact that you can't deal with this soft shell part. And
Mhm.
then so then here's a number 2 I have in that. So if you recognize that, the number 2 is this. In the research and all this stuff, we called it initially bring it to light, but we realized bring it to light is not enough. The idea, so we changed the LBR, which is bring it to light, break, and then revisit, to BBR for burn off. The idea of burn off is someone who will challenge you,
Yeah.
who doesn't let you get away with like, oh, I'm so sorry, Brandon. I hope you feel better. You're a great guy. No, that's not like, you don't need that. When you're in that state, you need someone who can hit back and challenge, and then you can hit back. And in that you say BBR because you're going to need a break before you revisit. When you burn off, so like the word vulnerability is great, but a word I liked even better from the military was burning it off, right? Burning it
Burn
off.
off your emotions.
You
It's like
need to
it
burn off how you
Yeah.
feel,
Yeah.
because emotions, negative emotions inside your head, that 90% not burned off, turns into such lethal toxins that physically can manifest into crazy shit, including cancer and all kinds of other stuff. But even if you don't go that extreme, it will cripple you. It is literally like driving life and making decisions drunk. So the need to burn it off, and you need another human being to hit back to help burn it off. So that notion of finding that partner, that what we call training partner, TP, like the burning it off is actually how you can get through that window. And so I think, I don't know if next week we'll cover this too. This notion, we were coaching someone about, what's fascinating about this notion of rock bottom? And the notion of hitting rock bottom is the birthplace of the next level, the next phase of your life.
Mhm.
But the reason we never get to that next level is we avoid rock bottom. So how do we get to rock bottom?
Yeah.
And how do we get there fast, right? Don't you want to, we went catching crabs. I was thinking for the poor soft shell crabs, I'd want to stay in that state as little time as possible,
Yeah.
right?
Just another question just coming up just before we go. Katie Poe, if you want to unmute, she's asking about our take on, well, there's a whole identity issue. Go ahead, Katie, if you want to unmute, and then I'll let Charlie try to sort of read the thread while you're talking too. Are you with us, Katie Poe? Is she with us? No, did she go?
What was the question?
Oh, just about the COVID vaccine, people who want to keep their own identity of, is this good or bad for me? My company's announced they'll terminate folks who do not get vaccinated or go through a legal waiver process. Anyone's else company doing this And she's saying that it's supposedly to allow folks to come back into the office, but a lot of people don't want to be told what to do with their body, nor do they want to come back to the office.
Yeah, I mean,
Vaccination
I
required for
think
most schools or travel, Courtney say, yeah. We have I mean, so we're requiring vaccination to be in the office, but we're not forcing everybody to come to the office. We have a whole different program we launched called Partner. So we're not requiring everybody to come back, right?
you're
But if you're,
stepping in an office, you better
if
be
you're coming
vaccinated.
in, you have to be vaccinated. So that's
inside
how
or outsider, you're not allowed it, right? But
that's just our choice, right? Our decision.
but there's an
I-
option to work from home with no
Right.
vaccine, wherever if you want.
Yeah, I mean, we're curious to see what is going to happen with other companies, because I think a lot of companies said everybody will come back like post Labor Day, right? It's kind of this like in September, October, but a lot of companies haven't forced a lot yet, but it's starting to happen. And so I really don't know what's going to happen. I'm curious to see
But
what
can I
companies
tell
do.
you, like we're having this quick
Yeah.
fire Q&A with some employees. You know, the hardest part right now for a lot of people,
Mhm.
I don't know if you recognize this. Most of what you're reading is not true. It's just surveyed information of what people think they should say in the survey and their opinions. But the media has made it seem like that's what would happen. And we've done a lot of work with survey, companies and leaders and whatnot over times. What shows up in surveys and what actually happens is vastly different. I mean, obviously the best example was elections, right? But like surveys, people actually also fill in what they think they're supposed to say. It's not what they'll actually do. Like,
Yeah.
and so this is a part where I think the hardest part for a lot of people right now is that we're kind of in this holding state. What do we do? Like, and so everything you're reading is actually the media loving it, by the way, because like we're feeding on our 90% mental terrorizing mind, and they're feeding you information of what will happen. They're predicting. They're affecting your future outlook with what opinions and stuff on people saying. And a lot of these surveys too, I found it's like 12 people, 100. It's like, I'm like, but they say it as if everyone's going to do this. There's a definitive nature to the way they put it. We won't know until it happens, right? It's like you always know once it happens. And the problem is because of Delta and COVID and everything, everyone's moving dates and now return to offices like January, February, later, this, that, like, schools are obviously coming back right now, at least in the US, and what will happen. There's so much, this is the unknown and anxiety. So a lot of us are in a holding pattern of, I don't know, I'm going to wait and see. Well, what happens if that's the new norm? Which sounds insane, no? Everything you feel on wait and see is not going to end. It's going to be wait and see on almost everything for the foreseeable future. Imagine if you actually thought the next 100 years could be like this. Then you're like, shit, that constraint, what are my options and choices of how to operate? Recognizing that's the new norm. I think there's a belief we have that that's a temporary norm, right? And maybe it is, but from the data we've seen and all the stuff that we've done over the years, I believe this is actually just representative of the new norm. So then at what point will we accept, okay, that's the new norm and I need to figure out how to live my most optimal life, right? In this new norm, what are the constraints and what are my options and choices? And it's not like a binary pull the trigger or zero. How do I gate stuff? How do I experiment? How do I, it's like I have to get married and I already bought a house, person I'm meeting, and I've already decided children's names. Can we make it? As opposed to let's start figuring out baby steps, testing, gating, iterating. So I think there's a lot more of a new normal that we are struggling to recognize and accept. And I loved, even on COVID, the countries I've admired the most have been like countries like New Zealand, countries like Singapore. New Zealand's still doing the keeping everyone out strategy of COVID. Singapore went this other route, which is they're opening up and they're being smart and cautious about it, right? Singapore is like 80-something% vaccinated and all that stuff, but they're saying this is a new normal and we're going to learn to live with this. And so there's a part of starting to recognize what are the options and choices and how can I start navigating, as opposed to putting everything on pause and waiting. It's like holding your breath and waiting.
It is like holding breath.
Right? You're going to die if you hold your breath too long. So there's a part of like, you need to start breathing and start to do shit. So.
All right, you guys. Well, love some feedback. We'll see you next week with the second part, right? Part two.
Oh, yeah.
Part two
Yes.
on intentionality.
Intentionality, right? And
All
kind
right,
of cool
you
things
guys.
there.
All
All right.
right. We'll see you next week.